Hey, good morning. This is Laura Roehrick, foot care nurse, and this video is specifically for a group of nurses I'm going to be talking to who are students at Santa Rosa JC, which is where I graduated in 1974, I think 51 years ago. Unbelievable. Anyway, I thought that I would do the introduction and a little bit about me before you come to that so that you kind of feel like you know me a little bit more and you might have different questions, and the time that I have with you in person can be more usefully geared toward the foot care aspects of my career. Because I've had 51 years as an RN. It's been a long and very windy career, and I just thought I would do it this way as for fun. We'll see what happens. So I was raised in Marin County. I was born in New York, moved out here when I was 4 years old. My parents got divorced when I was about 5. Grew up in Sausalito and had kind of a unique childhood. I don't know if you know where, well, yeah, you will know where Sausalito is. You guys are all from Santa Rosa area. So anyway, I grew up there. My childhood was pretty wild, which sort of led into my wild nursing career, I think. It was a pattern that was set early on. I had moved already, I think, 5 times by the time we came out here when I was 4 years old. And by the time I was 17, we had moved 17 times. Luckily, most of them were in the same area, so I kept the same friends, and it was really kind of cool. I lived in Sausalito, Mill Valley, Stinson Beach, Strawberry, in that area, which was fun. And then I came up here in 1970 to go to nursing school. But to back up, I was not a kid who grew up saying I wanted to be a nurse. I never even thought of it. In fact, nobody in my family went to college, and it wasn't even an idea in my head. I didn't take any college prep classes. It was really kind of wild how I ended up in nursing school. What happened was I was graduating early. I was going to go to Europe with a friend of mine and travel Europe, and I had a job at a ski lodge to make the money to go to Europe in December, right after I graduated. I had a terrible break of my leg, spiral fracture, like 20 pieces, tibia, fibula. So no Europe, and I was stuck in this full-length cast. And one day I was over at a friend's house, and her mom was on the phone talking to a friend, and I just overheard this conversation. And she was talking to her friend about applying to get into nursing school at Marin Junior College. And I just heard her say, "If you're a nurse, you can get a job anywhere." And I went, "Oh, well, I'll be a nurse then." So that's kind of how the idea got in my head. But backing up, one of the things that I did as a child, I remember very specifically, I grew up part of where I lived the most during all those moves. I had three or four solid years at the houseboat community down at Gate 5. And very often there was a little kind of dump near us, a little garbage area. People would just throw out their stuff, and there were often things would, wash up on shore. And I just remember loving to take things that were really funky and taking them home and cleaning them and making them better. And that's kind of how I feel about feet today. Actually, kind of the worse the feet they are, the more the challenge and the more reward from that. So that's just kind of a little bit of my personality back there. I also was sort of an entrepreneur. We used to make little crafts, and we'd go from house to house, and little soap things with washcloths and sequined eyes and little animals and stuff. And if it was a really fancy house, I would charge more. So there's my entrepreneurial business background. Anyway, so I ended up after my cast came off. I moved up to Katati area and started taking JC classes. I actually was 17 years old then. I became legally an emancipated minor, so I could move out of the house, and an aunt gave me $1,000 worth of stock. So back then that was huge money, and that's kind of what got me going. But other than that, I got grants and little scholarships. Exchange Bank, I think I got some money, and there was thrift stores that would pay for your nursing books. The Welfare League I think was anyway, I worked my way. I did not have anybody helping me. I remember in the summer, I worked night shift at a convalescent home. I became a nurse's aide like immediately, even when I was taking my pre-rec classes. So I started at 17. I graduated at 21. It took me 4 years to get through the JC, which seems to be pretty typical. And the first 2 years I worked as a nurse's aide to get me through school. And I graduated at 21, and I have a list that I'm reading off my computer here. My first job was at a skilled nursing facility. We called them convalescent homes back then, and it was in Petaluma. And I remember when they hired me, they said, you can sleep half the shift, we just need your license here. So that was weird. And I didn't. I mean, I think I maybe took a long break and a nap or something. I hated nights, absolutely hated nights. And I got out of there very quickly. And I'm just going to list some of I did Creekside Medical, which was rehab. And back in the day, they did not have hospice yet, but they would have kind of cancer wards or wards where people were dying, and I was on that ward for quite a while, so I had a lot of experience with death and dying early on, and it kind of became a little depressing after a while. I felt like I was the angel of death or something, but it was something that I just kind of took to sort of naturally, and to this day I have a lot of hospice patients, and I really have a lot of reward from working with them and experience in that area. So anyway, so did that. I worked at Sonoma Valley Hospital for a couple months, and back in those days, our medicines were on little cards. So you had this stack of cards with a rubber band around them, and you'd put them in this tray. And like the nurse before me went home with the cards in her pocket. I mean, it was just nuts. It was very unsafe. And I remember leaving a resignation letter on a paper towel from the bathroom saying, I will never be back here. So that was one of my memories of my early jobs. And then, let's see. Oh, my first big job was Sonoma Developmental Center, back when that was open and running. And just kind of historically, my grandfather worked during World War II. He was the secretary to the president of Sonoma Developmental Center. I have a picture of my mom standing in front of one of those buildings where they lived. So that was weird, kind of full circle coming back there. I worked at Tallman Nursery, which was very depressing. And yet rewarding. It was all the babies, and I remember there were 3 drowned victims that were resuscitated that had brain death, and crack or a heroin baby. Anyway, it was very, very heavy duty, and I didn't last there too long. During my internships, or whatever we called them back then, I had rotated through a pediatrician's office group, this really fancy group of the top smartest guys in town. They were so awesome. And one of the doctors there was Dr. Rostel. And I had a dream about him one night. And for some reason, I went the next day and I said, I dreamt about you, and I just thought I'd check in with you because I'm really kind of depressed working out here. Anyway, long story short, he was breaking away from his practice and starting his own practice down the street in a house that he bought, and as a pediatrician was going to open a private pediatric thing. So I became his office nurse just because I dreamt about him. So that was kind of cool. Then I got really into emergency stuff. I started taking first aid classes and EMT, and got certified in everything. And I worked and I ended up leaving Dr. Rostel's office to work at community, I think in their CCU. Then there's so many of them, I'm going to skip through it. Then I went to Kaiser down in San Rafael, worked their ER. Then I came up to Santa Rosa when they opened the clinic in 1980. So I was one of the first 8 nurses to work at Kaiser Clinic. I think it was 80 when it was over at Creekside. And then they opened up where they are now in that first building, and I was family practice. And then I broke away from Kaiser for a little bit. I moved down to Oakland, and I was in one of those registries. So I would go do med surge all around San Francisco, Oakland. I did Highland Hospital, which was really interesting. I worked on the prison ward there. That was fascinating. They were certainly interested in heparin locks. A lot of those patients there, when they saw what that was all about, that was kind of funny. The memories that you have, it's really interesting looking back on all these times. But when I was in that registry, I ran into another nurse in the registry, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to be an operating room nurse. If you're an operating room nurse, you get paid to be on call." And I went, "Oh, that sounds good. I like that." And they were recruiting. They were just accepting applications for a operating room 6-month class at UC Med Center in San Francisco. So because of her, telling me that, the next day I go over there, fill in the application, and I got in. There was like 7 of us students, and it was the only year that they got a stipend from somewhere. So I was actually paid my tuition, which was like $1,200, or maybe I got $1,200 a month. Anyway, they paid for my tuition, my books, and I got $1,200 a month, I believe, for 6 months. So I was paid to go through this program where before and after this particular grant, every other nurse had to, pay for herself to go through and not get paid. And so that was extremely serendipitous. And so I've kind of, just went on this trail of one thing to the other, floating around. And I loved that. I absolutely loved it. It was the best job I think I've ever had. Fascinating. It actually gave me my background for infection control, the love of good instruments and procedures and all that stuff. But unfortunately, I had a boyfriend at that time who was from Brazil, and he wasn't a citizen, and I think we were going to get married, and I was going to move to Brazil. So I quit. And actually, I never moved to Brazil. I regret, quitting, but, life changed, and that was something. So then I moved back to Santa Rosa after that. And I had the OR background, so I worked on call, I think, at Novato, Petaluma, Memorial, community hospital, which was really kind of scary because I didn't have that great of a background. I mean, I'd only been an OR nurse for 1.5 years, and to really feel comfortable, in that field, I always just was happy I made it through the shift without my biggest fear was a ruptured aortic aneurysm. That's what I didn't want to have happen, because that can be very scary. And wouldn't you know it, the very last surgery I ever did in my life, I guess, because I quit after that, was just that. But it wasn't a horrible one. It was rupturing. It hadn't anyway. So that's how I left the OR field, because let me see, at that time, yeah, I think that's about when I got married, and then I settled down. I went back to Kaiser. So I then got I opened up the Kaiser Hospital as a perioperative nurse because of my background. I didn't have 2 full years OR nurse, so I couldn't be an OR nurse there. So I opened up as a perioperative nurse, and that was really fun. And then I had a really strange kind of partner there that we didn't really get along. It wasn't not getting along. It was just strange. She was strange, and what can I say? I took a job in the clinic to get out of there for that reason. So then started my years of just switching jobs within the Kaiser system. And because things would come up, and because of that background, see, this is where the background of my childhood of just moving, and as many jobs as I had that many houses, cars, relationships. I mean, my whole life was just seeking dopamine, I guess. I was later, obviously, diagnosed with ADHD, which is no big surprise. But this made sense to me of my life, that it wasn't just me. And my mother and my father and almost all my siblings and relatives are, nobody's really neurotypical in my family. I don't even know if anybody's neurotypical anymore. But anyway, so back to the Kaiser Kaiser thinks. So in 1994, they changed things. I went on call. This was the story that was really kind of, it was very heavy at the time. It was 1994. My mother-in-law, I was married by then, and I had two small children. I had been working in the clinic. My mother was diagnosed with lung cancer, and at the end of her illness, when she was dying, I decided to take an on-call position because I did have a lot of seniority. I was one of the highest senior nurses there at Kaiser. And as soon as I went on call, my nursing manager changed the policy, and she was waiting to do this. I'm not fibbing about this. Anyway, she changed the policy that no longer could you be on call outside of your home clinic. And my whole thing was I was experienced all over the clinic in various clinics, and that's why I thought I could get as much work as I wanted whenever I wanted, and I'd have a flexible schedule, could take care of my dying mother-in-law. And nope, didn't happen. We actually went bankrupt. I was not getting work. It was absolutely horrible, the most stressful time in my life. Well, one of them. Now, I've had a longer life and I've had other stresses. But anyway, so what happened was I was still a Kaiser employee. I just wasn't getting any work. So I would look at their job boards, and there was a job that came up it said occupational health nurse, 12 hours a week, Richmond, which was, 50-minute hour away, longer in traffic, or 50 miles, whatever, from Santa Rosa. So I applied for it. 12 hours was better than nothing. So I went down there. I went for the interview. I go in the room with a man who turned out was the doctor, and then there was a manager with him. And we're sitting down, and they say, well, you're primarily going to be cutting the toenails of our patients with diabetes. And I go, what? I probably was a little bit more graceful than that, but I said, wait a minute, we were taught in nursing school we cannot cut toenails, that is the podiatrist or the families, that it's not in our scope of practice. And they said, no, that's not true. You can do it as a nurse. And come to find out later, the big reason that nurses are not taught toenail care is there's no code, so they can't get paid for it. And back then, in those days, right in that year, 94, Medicare still covered routine foot care. So there were lots of podiatrists, and all old people had podiatrists. So this was just changing at that time. So anyway, to wrap around, I took the job because why not? I was kind of handy, crafty. I'd sew and knit and things like that. And I thought, so the next week they threw me into, a whole day of high-risk patients without any kind of training, background, nothing. No. The podiatrist came in. There was three pieces of it. There was three instruments. This big clunky nippers. There was a really big clunky rasp, and bone rasp, and then there was a curette. And their infection control is you'd rinse them off with water, and then you'd stick them in this pink alcohol in between patients. So that's the instruments that I was taught on. That's the infection control, and it was covered. The policy, I wished I had it. I probably do in my archives of papers somewhere. There was like one paragraph that gave the job description of what I did, or that covered what I did, and it was terrible. But anyway, so Bart, that was the podiatrist. He'd come in and he'd go, oh, you hold it like this and you cut like this. And, I like I said, for some people who are handy, I took to it. I really liked it. I didn't know what I didn't know, so I wasn't completely freaked out yet until I started learning more about what I really should know working with these people. I didn't know about neuropathy. I didn't know about anything. Anyway, but what happened was I liked it, and the patients really liked me, and even though I didn't know what I was doing, I seemed to be helping them. And during this terrible depressing time in my life, it really was kind of a life-saving thing. I really got attached to my patients, and that was wonderful. But at that time, Kaiser had this system where they had medical librarians. I don't think they do that anymore. They used to have a whole medical library at Santa Rosa. You could go down there and sit and read magazines, all these journals and stuff. So anyway, what I did, they had not only the medical library, they had these librarians. And I said, could you please do a search for me? Anything that you can find about diabetes, toenails, foot care, calluses, corns, blah, blah, blah. And so they did, and it was so cute that I got called in like a week later, and I picked up 30 articles. I remember I was so proud. I love binders and making protocols and all that stuff. So I had this little binder of articles, and I read them all cover to cover, and I started teaching myself, because what I had thought before even getting the articles was, if I'm helping people and I don't know what I'm doing, what could happen if I actually knew what I was doing? So that it became my goal to do just that. So one of the or several of the articles back then, my now friend, mentor, buddy, pal, Teresa Kellichai, was writing articles and even had a little video series on foot care nursing. And so she was one of, there's a long history of foot care nursing, and I have some videos on YouTube that go into it and kind of my bitter experiences. I'm kind of over all that now, right? Our world is so crazy now. It's like you can't really get too attached to these past wrongs. But I had quite a history with the whole development. Being a pioneer in the field of something is an extraordinary experience. So anyway, Teresa back then was one of the true pioneers, and she had a master's degree. She was working at the Medical University of Charleston. She wrote an article called Intrapreneurship. So she had a foot care clinic within the university. I can't remember how the business end of it was, but it was very different. And so she was writing articles about it, and she had this little course. And so I got in touch with her, and back then there wasn't computers or even cell phones, I don't think, like there are now. I called the university. I called her department. I left a message for her. And if she called me back, and that, I mean, I can truly say the rest is history. I would not have my life without that connection, and she was just so gracious and generous, and I explained my situation, and we talked, and I ended up going out there she would have little weekend courses at assisted living homes with her partner Karen. And by that time, I actually could cut nails, and I sort of knew what I was doing, but I had never heard of a Dremel. That's what they were using to file nail files back then, until one of my patients at Kaiser said, "Why aren't you using the Dremel?" And I asked my podiatrist about it, and they go, "Oh, no, you can't do that. There's dust in the air. No, we're not having that. No, don't, like closed subject." So I didn't even know about it until I went to this course. So I actually ended up kind of helping them. So it was fun. I was both a student and helper in the course. And that's where I was introduced to the Dremel grinder. And that's what people were using back then. Mostly, I think, with a sandpaper bit. And Dremels go 10,000 RPMs. They're very big and bulky. You can get carpal tunnel from them. They're very coarse. Maybe in a developing country now, it could be appropriate if you have nothing else. But anyway, that was state of the art back then, and that's what I was taught, and that's what I did, I think, for 8 years. So that, I think, is where I'm going to stop. Let me see. Should I stop now? And then finish the rest. This is a tough one. I think I will stop for now. If I decide to go back, I'll do a second part to this. but it's gotten long. It's 24 minutes here. I don't think I've done such a long thing. Oh, and by the way, see this little thing here? I have such thin skin now that the other night I had some lipstick there, and I was going like this. I created a bruise. So I am now investigating with ChatGPT how to what to do for fragile capillaries. Anyway, I did not get socked in the face, but I created my own little bruise there. So that is how I will end this, and I look forward to seeing you. I think it's October 9th, and then we can go from there, and unless I do another one before this. So, namaste.